It was supposed to be one of those peaceful Sunday mornings, the kind where the sunlight gently comes through the kitchen blinds and the smell of coffee and toast fills the air. I had gotten up early like I always do, careful not to make noise and wake anyone up. My knees ached, my hip hurt, same as it had every day since the surgery, but I was used to it. That's what happens when you're 72. Pain just becomes part of your day. I quietly set the breakfast table, just like I used to when my husband George was alive. It brought me some comfort, a little routine, a little memory. Laya, my daughter, came down first in her robe, yawning and glued to her phone. She barely glanced at me when I said good morning. Then the kids, Olivia and Ben, came down, sweet as ever. Olivia's 10, Ben's 7. They smiled at me like they always do, and sat down in their usual spots. Then came Derek, my son-in-law. Tall, broad, always looking like he's mad at the world. He didn't say anything, just poured himself coffee and took a plate of eggs Laya had cooked. He sat at the head of the table and started eating, loud and fast. I sat in my usual corner, way at the end. I didn't want to take up space. My plate just had a bit of toast and some scrambled eggs. I didn't want to be a bother. I never asked for much. I smiled and said, "Morning, Derek," softly. He didn't answer. The room felt heavy. Laya kept her eyes on her phone. The kids mumbled about a video game. I reached for my tea carefully, trying not to spill. And then, his chair scraped back. "You know what? I'm sick of this," he said, sharp and angry. We all froze. "You eat but don't help," he snapped at me, his face red. "You just sit here like you're the queen of this house. But you're not. You don't belong here freeloading off us." Laya looked up fast. Olivia dropped her spoon. Ben shrank into his seat. I just stared at him, stunned. I try to help, Derek," I said. "My hip's still healing. The doctor—" He laughed. Not a real laugh, a cold, mean one. "Your hip? You've been here 6 months. You use our water, our electricity, our food, and do nothing. You take up space." "Derek, please," Laya said under her breath, eyes wide. "Not now." But he didn't stop. He picked up his mug of hot coffee and threw it at me. The steaming liquid splashed across my lap, soaking my old blue nightgown. It stung my skin. I gasped, not from pain, but from shock. The mug hit my floor and rolled away. I looked down, my hands shaking, watching the brown stain spread across the fabric. The kids stared at me with wide, scared eyes. Then Derek slammed his plate down so hard the eggs bounced and the plate cracked. "I work 50 hours a week and come home to this?" he yelled. "A house full of people just sitting around while I pay for everything?" I couldn't move. The burn on my leg throbbed, but I felt frozen. Laya just stared at the table, lips tight, saying nothing. "You're not my mother," Derek said, quieter now, but meaner. "And you don't deserve to live here for free." Those words hit like knives. I looked at Laya, silently begging her to say something, anything. To remind him that I was her mother, that I raised her, cared for her when she was sick, loved her through everything. That this house used to belong to me and her father. But she just whispered, "Derek, not now. Just not now." The silence after that was louder than any shouting. Little Olivia picked up a napkin and handed it to me with her tiny hand. I took it, my hands trembling, trying to wipe away the coffee and the shame. "I think I'll go upstairs," I said quietly. I didn't say a word. Just turned and walked up the stairs, one slow step at a time. My fingers curled around the banister, stiff and aching, but I held on tight. It wasn't the pain in my body that made it hard to breathe. It was something deeper, something heavier. It was the moment I truly felt it. I didn't belong here anymore. Not in this house, not with this family, not with the people I had once thought of as home. The place I had helped build, the love I had poured in, the memories I had kept alive. None of it seemed to matter now. At the top of the stairs, I paused and looked back. Derek was already sitting again, scrolling through his phone like nothing had happened. Laya was gathering up plates. The kids just stared down into their cereal bowls, like they were trying to disappear. That's when it hit me. I wasn't a mother in this house, not a grandmother, not even really a person, just someone sitting in a chair they wished was empty, a shadow, a ghost. I went upstairs like one too. My steps were heavy, my breaths shallow. The coffee had soaked through my gown and into my skin, and it still burned. My legs stung. My nightgown clung to me like it wanted to remind me of the shame. The hallway felt cold, though I knew it was probably just the shock. I shut my bedroom door slowly, carefully, so it wouldn't make a sound. Then I turned the little lock, not because I was afraid anyone would come in, but because I needed to feel like I still had control over something. I sat on the edge of the bed. My hands were shaking in my lap. The floral blanket was still half folded from the morning. The pillow still had George's handkerchief tucked underneath it, right where I kept it every night. I looked down at my lap. The brown stains from the coffee had spread across my gown, blooming like bruises. I started unbuttoning my collar with fingers that barely worked. I changed slowly, quietly, into the softest housecoat I had left, one of the few that wasn't falling apart. Then I sat again, waiting, listening, but no one came. No footsteps, no knock, no apology, nothing. Downstairs, life had already moved on without me. The silence was louder than yelling. It filled every corner of the room. I pressed a hand to my chest and felt something small under the fabric. I reached inside and pulled out the gold locket I wore every single day. Even when they teased me for being too sentimental, I never took it off. With a gentle click, I opened it. George's photo was still inside, black and white, his eyes steady, his jaw strong, just like he looked the day he came home from the war. For a second, time fell away. I closed my eyes, and suddenly I was back there, in a different time. I could smell cedar and fresh paint. George stood outside with sweat on his brow and a hammer in his hand. He had built that porch board by board. He didn't have to, but he wanted to. That was who he was. After the war, he told me he needed to make something with his hands, something real, something peaceful. "This house will keep you safe when I'm gone," he once said, holding my face in those rough, work-worn hands. "That's why I'm building it with my own 2 fists." We moved in during the spring of 1959. Back then, the house sat on open land in Tennessee. Just us, some trees, and the sound of birds. No neighbors, just fields and deer that wandered close to the fence like they were saying hello. George painted the kitchen blue because he said it matched my eyes. I made our first meal there with flour still dusting my arms from baking cornbread. We laughed like kids, danced in the living room to a scratchy old radio, even before the floor was finished. And that house, our house, it held us like a secret, like a promise. That house had seen everything. It held us through the birth of our children and the quiet heartbreak of a miscarriage. It stood strong through summer storms that rattled the windows and winters where the only warmth came from stacking thick quilts and sitting close in silence. It was there when Laya, our youngest, came into the world. George had driven like a madman through dark country roads to get me to the hospital, ran every red light, passed every slow truck. When he finally held her, his whole face softened. It was like every hard thing the war had carved into him just melted away in that moment. He wasn't perfect, not by a long shot. But he loved us with a kind of steady, unshakable loyalty that never broke. Not once. Even at the end, when the cancer had stolen nearly everything from him, George still asked me to wheel him out to the porch each morning so he could watch the sunrise. That same porch he had built with his own hands. That land he had worked with sweat and grit. That house, our house, that he never stopped calling home. 2 days before he passed, in one of his last clear moments, he looked me right in the eyes and said something I'd never forgotten. "If they love you, Mabel, they'll honor this house. They'll see what it means to you. And if they don't, don't. Sign anything. Not a damn thing. This house was built with love. Don't let them turn it into something ugly. Promise me." And I did. I promised him. After the funeral, Laya and Derek brought me papers. Just a few signatures, they said. Nothing big. Laya looked down, like she couldn't quite face me. Derek, on the other hand, looked annoyed, impatient. I smiled and told them I'd think about it. They brought the papers again a few weeks later. And again. But I never signed. I tucked them into the bottom drawer of George's old desk, right, under the hand-stitched flag from his service and the little wooden box that held our wedding bands. I knew they thought I'd caved eventually. That since Laya was our daughter, everything had just passed to her by default. But they were wrong. I still had the deed, still had the power. And tonight, after Derek's cruel words, after that, coffee burned my skin and he acted like I was nothing. I knew what I had to do. Maybe George knew it would come to this all along. Sometimes love isn't just about memories. It's about protecting what's still here, what's still possible. I stood up slowly, crossed the room, and opened the old drawer. My hands found the file instantly. A little dusty, yes, but I knew that weight better than the weight of my own bones. Inside were the unsigned transfer papers, and underneath those, the deed, still in my name, clear as daylight. I sat on the bed and laid the papers in my lap, and in that quiet moment, I didn't feel like a ghost anymore. I felt alive, strong, like maybe I still mattered, and maybe it was time they remembered who this house really belonged to. That evening at dinner, I sat the way I always did, quiet, at the far end. My plate, as usual, had whatever scraps were left after everyone else had eaten. Laya handed it to me without looking. The kids talked about school. Derek scrolled on his phone between loud bites. The TV buzzed from the next room. No one asked how I was feeling. No one asked about the burn. On my leg, it still hurt, red and sore. But that pain was easier to carry than what I felt inside. I buttered my bread slowly, not because I was hungry, but just to pass the time. No one noticed me. I was just part of the furniture now, a chair in the corner, a curtain no one touched. Sometimes Olivia smiled at me. Sometimes Ben whispered, "Night-night, Grandma," if he remembered. But they were still children, innocent, not yet trained to ignore someone who once held them in her arms. After dinner, I was at the sink, rinsing my own plate in warm water when Laya came up behind me. "Mom," she said softly, "please don't take what Derek said this morning too seriously. He's under a lot of stress at work." I didn't say anything, just turned off the water. She spoke again, quicker this time, like she wanted to get it over with. "He's not a bad person, he just loses his temper sometimes. He doesn't mean anything by it." I turned and looked at her. Her eyes dropped to the floor. "He threw scalding coffee at me, Laya," I said, my voice low and calm. "In front of your children." She bit her lip. "I know, I really need you not to make things harder right now. Please." I looked at her for a long moment. Then I nodded once, turned back to the sink, and finished washing my plate. I was just washing my plate when she said it, harder. That's the word she used, like I was a problem, not a person, not a mother, not someone with a heart and history. Just someone who made her life more difficult. That night, I sat quietly in bed with a notepad and pen, the only things that still felt like they were mine. I didn't write because I was angry. I wrote because I had to. I started jotting down moments that hurt, little things, but they added up. January 18th, you just eat and watch TV. At least the dog fetches. February 5, threw my pillbox. in a drawer, said, "Keep your pills out of my kitchen." March 12th rolled his eyes at my cardigan on the chair. "You hanging laundry in my dining room now?" Writing became my quiet little habit. No one knew. I tucked the notebook under my pillow each morning. It gave me something back, my thoughts, my truth. During the day, they might ignore me, but at night, I wrote myself back into the world. I started watching Derek more closely. He walked around like the house was his stage, and we were just extras. Laya flinched when he raised his voice, even when he wasn't yelling at her. Every evening, he tossed his muddy boots in the hallway like the floor should thank him. The more distant Laya became, the more I felt her slipping. Not just from me, but from herself. She used to be so full of spark, always laughing or pushing back. Now she moved like someone who was scared of shattering. I wanted to ask her what happened to her fire, but the answer was right in front of me. She had given it up trying to keep the peace, and the cost had been too high. One evening, I was walking down the hall when I heard Derek talking in the garage. I stopped just outside the door. He didn't know I was there. I heard him laugh and say, "Nah, man, it's like living with a ghost. The old lady floats around, eats my food, acts like she's queen or something, doesn't lift a damn finger, says her hip hurts. I'd rather clean a dog kennel than live with a mother-in-law who thinks she's owed the world." There was laughter on the other end. Derek laughed too. My heart didn't stop. It just slowed, like it had to catch its breath. It was a strange, hollow feeling. Not surprise, more like a quiet kind of heartbreak. I walked back to my room without a sound. That night, I didn't write. I just stared at the ceiling, letting his words echo over and over. I'd rather clean a dog kennel. To him, I was less than an animal. I remembered something George once told me from his time in the military. He said the worst insult he ever heard wasn't shouted. It was whispered behind someone's back. It stuck because the person meant it and thought no one would care. Derek believed what he said, and he believed I wouldn't care. But I did. I cared more than he could ever know. Not because he surprised me, but because he confirmed my worst fear. That I was no longer me. I wasn't Mabel, the woman who used to cook Thanksgiving dinner for 30 people in this house. Not the Mabel who stitched Laya's prom dress when we couldn't afford a store one. Not the Mabel who cried with joy holding her newborn grandbaby. In this very living room, I had become invisible, just a background character in a life I helped build. That's when something inside me shifted. I didn't see this house as home anymore. It felt like a place full of memories I had to fight to keep alive. I realized if I died tomorrow, they wouldn't remember me as the woman who made this place. What it is, they'd just remember the old lady in the corner. And that was not going to be my ending. So the next morning, before anyone else woke up, I went to George's old writing desk. The air was heavy, the silence thick. I knelt down, feeling the ache in my hip, and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a faded leather folder, one George always kept locked up. I touched it like it was something holy, and to me, it was. I opened it slowly. Inside were papers, old but crisp, the deed to the house and the transfer agreement George had made with his lawyer almost 10 years ago. I remembered that day so clearly. We were in the kitchen. It was quiet. George sat across from Mr. Hal Whitman, our lawyer, his brow furrowed like he was fixing something important. And in his way, he was. I remember George saying it like it really mattered. I want the house to go to Laya one day. But he didn't want that to happen automatically. He wanted to make sure I had the final say. This house was built with Mabel in mind, he told the lawyer, and no one deserves it more. If anyone ever treats her like she's less than family, I want her to be able to say, "This is mine, and you don't belong here." I'll never forget how he looked at me. Calm, steady, serious. Not emotional, but clear, like he somehow knew there might come a day I'd need that power. Mr. Whitman, our lawyer, nodded and added a special rule to the documents. Laya's name would be on the will, but the house couldn't fully be hers, unless I signed one last line. All these years later, that line was still blank, still waiting. It was the only thing standing between me and the freedom to choose. I pressed the papers between my hands and slipped them into a plain envelope. At 7:15 in the morning, with the house quiet and still, I put on my coat. Derek never got up before 8 on weekends. Laya stayed in bed even longer. I had time. I caught the local bus into town, sitting by the window with the folder hugged tight to my chest like it could protect me. The town hadn't changed much. Same. Cracked sidewalks, same little coffee shop on the corner, and the same old courthouse with peeling white paint. Mr. Whitman still worked above the bakery that smelled like cinnamon. I buzzed the door, and when he opened it, his eyes lit up. "Well, if it isn't Mabel Jennings," he said with a kind smile. "It's been too long." I nodded, my voice shaky. "I need to talk about the house." A few minutes later, we were sitting across from each other, just like all those years ago. I laid the papers on the table and whispered, "I never signed it, but I think I might want to now." He studied them, adjusted his glasses, and said gently, "You absolutely can. George set it up just like he said. You're the final word." The truth settled in the room like dust, and I leaned back, finally letting out a breath I didn't even know I'd been holding. "And if I choose to sell it?" I asked. "You can sell it, gift it, lease it, burn it to the ground if you want," he said with a chuckle. That made me smile, just a little. Burn it to the ground. The idea was oddly satisfying. He paused, more serious now. "Are you thinking of leaving?" I looked at him and said, "I'm thinking of surviving." He nodded like he understood. Exactly what I meant. We talked a bit longer about how he could handle everything quietly, how I didn't want to fuss. He said that was no problem. That was exactly what I needed. Quiet, but final. When I stepped outside again, the sky had brightened and something inside me felt lighter. I walked through the little downtown, past flower beds and bakery windows, past kids holding their parents' hands. Then I stopped in front of a public bulletin board next to the post office. Mixed in with lost cat flyers and guitar lesson ads was a bright green notice, calling landowners, local conservation trust looking for rural properties to protect Tennessee's natural heritage. Let your land become a legacy. There was a phone, number printed underneath. I read it. Then I read it again. Something began to take root in my mind. I thought about the land behind our house, all that open space, the trees George had once cared for with his own hands, the wildflower field, where Laya used to run barefoot and laughing. I remembered George saying, "This place is peace. I want it to stay peaceful long after we're gone." Maybe that could still happen. Maybe I could still make that dream real. I carefully pulled the flyer down and tucked it into my coat pocket. When I got home, I went straight to my room, opened up George's old filing cabinet, and found the local map. I spread it across the bed and ran my finger along the lines that marked our land. 22 acres, untouched, still zoned as open space. Our land was still marked as private residential, exactly the kind of land a conservation group would be looking for. And now I knew exactly what to do. I wouldn't sell this house to Laya. I wouldn't let Derek get near it. I wouldn't even consider any of the neighbors who might paint over everything George and I built. No, I'd sell it to someone who would protect it. Someone who would make sure it stayed untouched and peaceful, just like George always wanted. That would be the justice he deserved. And if I was being honest, maybe it was also the quiet kind of revenge I'd never let myself imagine until now. I folded the map and placed it beside the flyer. The house was quiet, but I could still hear Derek's laugh echoing from the weekend, and Laya's voice calling the kids to clean up their toys. They thought I was just a shadow in the background. But they had no idea. The light was about to shift. And when it did, they'd finally see me for who I really was. I waited until late Monday morning, once the house was completely empty. Derek had left early, grumbling about traffic like he always did, and Laya had taken the kids to their piano and karate lessons. The only sounds left were the soft hum of the fridge and the ticking of the old kitchen clock. I sat at George's desk with the flyer in front of me, took a deep breath, and dialed the number at the bottom. The phone rang twice. A cheerful voice picked up. "Thank you for calling the Tennessee Land and Conservation Trust. How may I help you?" I cleared my throat. "Yes, good morning. I saw your flyer downtown about land you're looking to buy." "Yes, ma'am. We're currently reviewing a few rural properties for a conservation project. May I ask your name?" I hesitated. "Actually, I'd rather not give my name just yet. It's a sensitive situation." There was a pause. Then the warmth came right back into the voice. "Of course, ma'am, we understand. Would you like to schedule a quiet, private assessment?" "Yes," I said. "I'd like someone to come take a look, discreetly. I don't want anyone in the house to know." "Certainly," they replied. "We've done off-the-record evaluations before. What's the property address?" I gave it to them slowly, my heart thudding by the time I finished. They scheduled a private visit for Thursday afternoon. After I hung up, I sat there in silence. I felt something strange, something steady, like the hush right before a summer storm rolls in. Not fear, just calm, strong, and still. That Thursday, right at 2:30 p.m., a beige SUV pulled up near the back gate. A woman in her 30s stepped out, wearing a utility vest with the Trust's logo on it. A man followed, clipboard in hand. I met them outside, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and old gardening gloves. I'd dressed simply on purpose, blending into the land. I even softened my voice, slipping into the old Southern drawl I hadn't used in years. "Y'all the folks from the Trust?" I asked. The woman smiled warmly. "We are, here to evaluate the property." "Well," I said, nodding toward the house, "the owners ain't home. I'm just the caretaker. Been tending this place since the old man passed. You'll have to be quiet." They exchanged a quick look and nodded. No questions. I led them along the borders of the property, pointing out the tree line, the open pasture, and the little creek that still trickled fresh water through the southern edge. They walked slowly, snapping photos, jotting notes, murmuring to each other about soil, zoning, and wildlife. I answered every question without hesitation. I'd lived on this land for over 40 years. I knew every rock and root like family. Before they left, the woman turned to me and said, "We'd be very interested. If you're the one with the authority to make decisions, we'd love to send you a formal offer." I looked at her for a long second, then nodded. "I am. And yes, please do." That night, I couldn't sleep. But it wasn't from nerves, it was something else, something alive. I felt like I'd swallowed a spark. The next day, the email arrived. Their offer wasn't just fair, it was generous. More than enough for me to leave. More than enough to begin again. Enough to make sure Derek and Laya could never use this house as a throne to stand on while I was made to feel small. Laya was never coming back to this land. I knew that for sure. So I sat down calmly, printed the papers, and signed them with a steady hand. It felt like a quiet little win, even though my fingers trembled just a bit. I tucked the signed documents into an envelope, scribbled the date on top for notarizing, and placed it gently in the drawer next to the original deed. All that was left was one last signature at the courthouse. That evening, as the sun sank behind the trees and poured golden light across the living room floor, I stood in my room quietly folding clothes. I packed a small suitcase, just the essentials. My nightgown, the locket George gave me, a notebook, an old photo of him in a frame, a worn leather folder, my Bible, 2 scarves, arthritis cream, and a little jar of peppermint candies. It felt calm, almost like I was getting ready for a long trip I'd been waiting years to take. Then I heard laughter. I peeked through the small crack in my bedroom door and saw them, Derek and Laya, lounging on the couch like nothing had ever happened. His feet were up on the coffee table, and he had his arm around her. They were laughing at some silly TV show, like all those cold stares, harsh words, and slammed cups of coffee had just vanished into thin air. My daughter rested her head on his shoulder, and he kissed her hair gently. Their happiness buzzed, in my ears like static. I didn't say a word. I just closed the door and zipped up my suitcase. That moment stuck with me, not because it hurt, but because it made everything clear. They thought I was up in my room, fading into the background. But really, I was already halfway gone, unzipping a new future, one step at a time. Before the sun came up, I slipped out the front door. The stars were still fading, and the sky was just starting to wake up. I moved slowly, careful not to let the old hinges squeak, clutching my purse tight. Inside was everything I needed. The notarized documents, my ID, the original deed, and a small envelope with the last letter George ever wrote to me, for strength. The house behind me was completely quiet. No footsteps, no yelling, no laughter, just the soft hum of the fridge and the creaks of settling wood. They were all still asleep. I stood by the curb and took a deep breath of cold Tennessee air. It tasted like freedom. Right on time at 6:15, a yellow taxi pulled up. The driver, a young man with music playing softly, helped with my suitcase. He didn't ask questions. I was glad for that. "Downtown?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Courthouse first, then one more stop." We rode in silence. At the county clerk's office, I handed over every document with hands that didn't shake. The woman behind the counter smiled, looked through the papers, and nodded. "Looks good, Miss Jennings," she said. "The conservation group wired the funds this morning. It's all verified." Just like that, it was done, so fast, so final. I asked for a copy of the papers for my records, and as she printed them, she smiled again. "You know, we don't see many people donate land like this. You're saving something really special." I smiled back. "That's the point," I said. Then the taxi took me to see an old friend I hadn't visited in years, Marjorie Blackwell. She's a widow, too, with a sharp sense of humor and a porch full of wind chimes. We lost touch after George passed, mostly my fault, but when I called last week and asked if I could stay for a while, she didn't even blink. "Of course," she said. "I've got a warm bed and a fresh pie. You just bring your stories." She never asked why I was leaving. She just opened the door and hugged me like no time had passed. That afternoon, I got confirmation from the Land Trust. It was official. The house and land now belonged to the Tennessee Reserve Project. It was done. The next day, I sat on her porch with a book, watching squirrels chase each other along the roof. I didn't feel bitter. Just calm, like the kind of peace that only comes after you've walked through a storm and finally stepped into the sunlight. But back at the old house, my former house, things weren't so calm. Because at exactly 10:07 the next morning, Derek opened the front door and found 2 county officers in uniform and a woman in a gray suit from the Conservation Trust stood on the front porch. One of the officers spoke first. "Is this the residence of Derek and Laya Sanders?" Derek blinked, a little confused. "Yeah, it is." The officer continued, "We're here to inform you that this property has been legally transferred. You are now considered tenants without a contract. That means you don't have the right to live here anymore. You have 48 hours to move out." Derek laughed, like it was some kind of joke. "What are you talking about? My wife owns this house." The woman from the trust calmly handed him a folder. "She doesn't. She never did. The house was never legally transferred to her. Miss Mabel Jennings kept full ownership, and she has sold it. The property now belongs to the Tennessee Land and Conservation Trust." Laya rushed to the door, barefoot and wide-eyed. She snatched the folder. No, this has to be a mistake." My mom lives here. This is our home, our kids' home. The officer stayed calm. Ma'am, if you think your rights were violated, you're free to challenge it in court, but everything here is legal. You must leave the property within 48 hours, or you'll be removed by law. Everything exploded after that. Laya broke, down crying, begging to speak to me. Derek was yelling so loud, the neighbor across the street stepped outside. Olivia and Ben stood behind their mom, holding each other silently, their little faces full of fear. That was the moment I'd prepared for. 15 minutes later, I walked down the gravel path toward the house, wearing a simple navy coat. In my hand was the signed agreement, folded neatly like a flag. One of the officers turned and said, "Mrs. Jennings." I nodded. Laya saw me first. Her voice cracked as she ran toward me, her face streaked with tears. "Mom, what did you do? Why would you do this? We needed you. The kids, this is their home." I looked at her for a long second without saying anything. I needed her to feel the silence, the same silence I had lived with for months. Then I spoke, calmly. "You said I took up space." Derek stormed toward me, fists clenched. "You had no right. This was my home, too." I stood up straighter than I had in years and looked him in the eye. "Your home? You threw coffee at me like I was trash. You joked about me behind my back. You lived in my house and treated me like some stray dog." He opened his mouth to speak, but I raised my hand to stop him. "You all said I didn't belong, that I was just in the way, but I was never in the way. I was the foundation. I built this life. I built this home. And now, I'm building something new." I stepped forward and held out the deed. "I didn't take up space. I was the space. And now, this space is no longer yours." And just like that, I turned and walked away. The wind felt soft against my back, and for the first time in a long while, the heavy weight I'd carried was gone. I never thought I'd start something. Like a foundation. Honestly, I never even imagined leaving that house. For years, I figured I'd just grow old quietly, fade into the wallpaper, and be remembered only by the shadows in the hallway. But sometimes, all it takes is one shattered plate, one flying cup of coffee, one final insult, and something inside you wakes up. 2 weeks after the sale was finalized, I sat across from my lawyer in his sunny office. He handed me the wire transfer confirmation with a smile. "Everything looks good," he said, closing the folder. "So, what now?" I smiled back, just a little shy. "I want to help people like me, people who were forgotten in their own homes, people who still matter, even if their family doesn't. See it anymore." He raised his eyebrows. "Like a nonprofit?" "Exactly," I said. Then I pulled a napkin from my purse with a name scribbled on it. "Mob. Make older better." He chuckled. Catchy and clever. With his help and support from a friend at the local bank, I opened an account and filed the paperwork. Within a month, it was official. I had a small team, just volunteers at first. A few women from my old quilting group, a retired social worker, and one bright-eyed college intern named Darius. And just like that, something new began. People started calling me Miss Mabel, like I was someone important, and honestly, that made me smile. We started small, care packages for older folks stuck at home, friendly phone calls to check in on seniors living alone, and free legal advice for those being pressured to give up their homes or money. But the most powerful thing we gave wasn't food or money. It was a voice. We hosted our very first community meeting in the basement of a little Unitarian church on a Thursday night. I expected 5 people, maybe 10, but 30 showed up. By the second meeting, there were nearly 70. Grandmothers, war veterans, widowers. A quiet man who'd been kicked out of his daughter's house after his stroke. A woman whose family only came around when she handed over her Social Security. Checks. When it was my turn to speak, my heart was racing. I stood in front of them and told my story. I talked about the burn on my leg, The silence around the dinner table, the coffee that was thrown at me, the moment I signed the papers that changed everything. I spoke about George and the promise I had kept. When I finished, no one clapped at first, but it wasn't an awkward silence. It was full, heavy, respectful. Then someone clapped, then another. Some people stood. A few wiped away tears. And I knew we'd started something real. The next morning, a local news station called. Someone had filmed part of my talk and posted it online. The young producer asked if I'd be willing to tell my story on TV. "I don't want to be some kind of spectacle," I said. She replied gently, "Miss Mabel, you're not a spectacle. You're a voice people need to hear." The segment aired a week later. They filmed me sitting on Marjorie's porch, sipping sweet tea with wind chimes. Dancing behind me, soft piano music played as they showed clips of my old house, now marked with a sign that read, "Protected Land, Future Site of Tennessee Natural Preserve." And then, everything took off. I was invited to speak on a podcast, then at an Elder Rights Summit in Nashville. Letters started arriving from all over the country, Oregon, Maine, small towns I'd never heard of. Most of them began the same way. "I saw you on the news and cried. I've been living like a ghost too. You reminded me that I matter." One radio host even called me the coffee lady who took the land. I thought I'd hate that nickname, but I didn't. I laughed. That was me. The woman who had hot coffee thrown at her and turned that pain into something powerful. The woman who went from being called a burden to using her story to help others. The Mabel Foundation grew fast. We got a grant to help elders in dangerous or abusive situations find emergency housing. We teamed up with churches and libraries to teach workshops on things like property law and inheritance rights. We launched a support hotline. Darius, our college intern, built us a website. Marjorie ran our Facebook page, posting quotes from our meetings and pictures of the cookies we served. On the 1-year anniversary of the foundation, we held a celebration on the land where my old house once stood. The trees were tall, the air cool and calm. Under a big oak tree, we installed a brass plaque. It read, "In honor of Mabel Jennings, she took up space and gave it back, a guardian of dignity." I stood in front of that plaque, tears in my eyes, surrounded by people, many older, many who had felt invisible for too long. But that day, they stood tall, smiling, holding hands. I felt George with me then, not just in memory, but really there. Like he was just over my shoulder whispering with a chuckle, "Told you not to sign anything." That night, back at Marjorie's, I looked in the mirror and almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. Not because I looked younger, but because I looked alive. I smiled. Not the careful, quiet smile I wore during tense dinners, not the polite one I used in their house. A real smile, one that belonged to me. I used to think that once your kids grew up, your job was to disappear. Stay quiet, stay out of the way. But now I know. Some things, like your voice and your dignity, are worth standing up for, worth taking up space for. Selling the house didn't just give me freedom, it gave me a second chance, a chance to help others. That's how the Mabel Foundation began, right at Marjorie's kitchen table, with a pen, a notepad, and a cold cup of tea. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about making life better for elders everywhere. About reminding them, and the world, that they still matter. Sometimes, all people really need is someone to talk to, someone who truly listens. That's what our little support circle became. For many who joined, it was the first time they'd ever spoken their pain out loud. I remember one woman saying quietly, "I didn't think anyone would care if I just disappeared." That's when I knew we were doing something that really mattered. One day, someone shared a video of me telling my story, the one with the coffee cup thrown at me, the house deed I never signed. That video spread like wildfire. Suddenly, letters started pouring in from all over. People wrote to say I helped them feel brave enough to speak up, to stand tall. When the news called me the coffee lady who took the land, I didn't hide. That cup of coffee? It drew a line in the sand, and I stepped right over it. That's the moment I started finding myself again. I didn't just get the house back, I got me back. These days, my life is peaceful. I live in a small white house with green shutters right by the edge of a quiet forest. My mornings begin with hot tea and birds singing in the trees. My evenings end with the warm glow of a lamp and the soft rustle of pine branches. There's a rocking chair on the porch that creaks like an old friend. It reminds me, I'm still here. I'm still choosing calm over chaos. People come by sometimes, women I've never met, who heard about the coffee lady and saw something of themselves in my story. Women who felt invisible, unheard, or stuck for far too long. They come with stories. I listen, I offer them tea, and if they ask for advice, I share the little I've learned. That silence is not love, and forgiveness doesn't mean going back to someone who hurt you. Last month I got a letter from my daughter. She said she was sorry. She told me she finally left him. I read her words slowly, folded the letter with care, and placed it in my drawer. I forgave her, but I didn't write back. Not all doors need to be opened again for healing to happen. Every night, I whisper to George's photo. I didn't sign it. I didn't let them turn me into a ghost. And then I sleep like air, dreaming only of trees and the quiet I finally earned. If you've stayed with me through this story, thank you. Thank you for listening, not just to words, but to a journey. This wasn't just about a house. It was about dignity, about holding on when no one thought you could, about elders like me, who people sometimes overlook, but who are really the roots keeping whole families from falling apart. I didn't just take back a house, I took back my voice, my worth, my right to choose peace instead of silence. If you believe older people should be heard, respected, and remembered, come be part of Her Yesterday by Emma. We share powerful, emotional, true stories every week about grandmothers, mothers, and strong women who found their voice when no one expected it. Click subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss a story that might just change how you see the world. Because truth doesn't expire, and courage, it's never too late.